name is Frank Zacarri, and this is Life Altering Events. Now, a question I've been asked a few times is, Frank, you had this real successful radio show. Why did you move to TV? All right, it's very simple. Here's the reason. Many of us have had enough of negative and hostile talk shows. The model has gone on for far too long and is far too destructive. It's time for an interview show that people can watch that focuses on positive news, a show that highlights issues we have in common, which are so much greater than what divides us. What are these issues? Their love, their life, their family, their passion, their education. I will bring you guests that will inspire and motivate you and challenge you to become the best version of yourself. Well, today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about shifting a culture in education. Everything revolves around education, and we're going through a major issue in this COVID world. So I did a little bit of research here. What I found from my guest here today is 65% of preschool children today are going to work in a job or a career that doesn't exist. Is our education system ready for this challenge? Can schools teach something that doesn't exist? And the answer is yes, they can. While we may not know what the job is or the job title or the requirements, schools have the ability to teach the skills that are needed to succeed in the future. All right, what skills are we talking about here, Frank? Well, leadership. One doesn't have to have a title to be a leader. Social and cultural awareness, collaboration, critical thinking. These are skills that must be taught from the earliest days in school, because these are the skills that are required regardless of the industry or your profession. And don't tell me it can't be done. Don't tell me the education system's too unwieldy. It can't be done. We had no idea how to put a man on the moon, but we found a way. We had no cure for polio, but we found one.
Right.
We're finding a cure for COVID. How are we going to do this? We're going to do this because when committed people put their mind to something important, we find a way. Now, my guest today is Jeff Ikler, and he is someone at the forefront in shifting our education process. Let me tell you something about Jeff. He is the director of Cutico Career and Leadership Coaching, where he works with individuals to overcome career issues and with leaders to develop sustained, magic word, sustained changes in their leadership practices. His leadership philosophy is very simple. Leaders exist to serve and to develop their staffs in pursuit of achieving desired outcomes and impacts. He is also one of the co-authors of the book, Shifting: How School Leaders Can Create a Change of Culture. I strongly recommend you get this book. Jeff, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Nice to be here, Frank. Thank you for having me. And let me say right at the beginning, thank you for your service. I know that you are a former Air Force server and
yes.
medic, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Now, Jeff, this topic is hot. Education, and what are we going to do with it? How's it going to change? Now, we all know the statistics. 70% of every major change project fails miserably. So how do you see us starting the shifting from the traditional thinking in schools?
So let me go back a few decades, all right?
Sure.
I started in education as a teacher back in the 70s. And I left formal teaching after 7 years and went into educational publishing within Scott Forsman, based out of Glenview, Illinois. And what I noticed about education, both in the time when I was a teacher and when I was in educational publishing, and I stayed in educational publishing with different companies, but the same corporation for almost 40 years.
Wow.
What I noticed about education was that there are well-intentioned people on the outside of education. These could be thought leaders, university folks, that sort of thing. They're well-intentioned people on the inside saying, this is what we need to do to make education better.
Right.
And write up an article, they write a book about it, and people get all excited until somebody else comes along and says, this is what we need to do to make education better. And we drop what we were doing.
That's right.
And we start something else. And the reason that happens, and we talk about this in the book, is that we sometimes forget, we often forget why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we in this business of education to begin with?
Exactly.
And I apologize if you occasionally hear street noise. That's one
Don't
of
worry
the
about it.
ambience of living in New York City. All right.
Don't worry about it.
Yep. We forget why we're here. What's the business that we're in, if you will.
Yes.
And because of that, because we don't have that why in our head, the purpose in our head, we're willing to try all these different things. They all come, we call them shiny pennies. And I can't tell you, Frank, how many people, when we interviewed for the book and we would say, have you ever noticed this? And they would, to a one, they would go, oh my God, this is us to a T. We start these different initiatives and then we stop them and then we start something else. And what eventually happens is that we get this initiative fatigue, and we have the antithesis of a culture of change. So we make the case that job one is really for educational leaders to work with their teams to coalesce around, what are we doing in our building? What is it that we want on behalf of our kids in this community? And that might differ from community to community. And I'm a big advocate of keeping decision-making local. I think, if we look nationally at big national initiatives, things like Race to the Top, Common Core, and that, they have failed to a large degree. One, because they're trying to be something for everybody, but also they didn't have the common understanding of what they were all about.
That's right. That's exactly right. I've read part of your book. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but you talk about three areas of focus. They were outcome, impact, and the organizational why. Can you elaborate on that?
So the organizational why is what I was getting at earlier, is that we make a statement that this is what we believe we're trying to do on behalf of our kids and community. Mm-hmm. And what I don't mean by this, Frank, if you go into any school building, what you're apt to see are a poster size statement of bullets that have come from the school board. This is what we're about. Yep. You can read them in one school, go to the next school, and they're often very much the same. Mm-hmm. And instead, what we talk about when we talk about agreeing on the why is, can you get this down to a sentence or two? That if I go into your building and I stop you in the hall and I say, Frank, what are you trying to accomplish in your school? What are you guys about? Mm-hmm. You go, well, this is what we're trying to do. And it doesn't have to be a formal, beautiful sounding thing, but it's something that everybody believes in and that they can give back. So we talk about how in the book, we talk about how you reach that type of why. And then the outcomes and the impacts start to make sense. The outcome is what happens if you make a change. What's the immediate benefit or the immediate result that's derived from that change? All right. Mm-hmm. But it's relative to the why. Then impact is if we're doing a number of changes, how are they working collectively together to have greater impact that's going to lead us to our why? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It absolutely makes sense. I was in the corporate world for years and years, and we used to call it a mission statement. Then I read Simon Sinek's book, and basically it's your why statement.
Right.
Why are you doing what you're doing? And then everything should revolve around going toward that why. And I see this in education. I don't see it to the degree you do, but there's an awful lot of conflicting whys. They cannot decide what the why is. Is that right?
Yeah, and mission statements and vision statements, we talk about this in the book, they're often way too elaborate.
Yes.
They don't get down to the real point because people are unwilling to commit to one or two central thoughts that they're about.
That's right.
Our feeling is that's why change goes awry, is because we lose sight of the horizon, right?
That's right.
We can't point the boat in the direction that we want to go, because some of us may want to go over here, others may want to go over here.
That's correct. That's absolutely the case. And Jeff, large bureaucracies, which education is, they tend to stifle change. Somebody likes it the way it is. In my experience, having been the director of government operations for AT&T and NCR and dealing with government, was the change sort of comes from the bottom up. It sort of evolves with a movement of some sort. So how can an individual school or an individual teacher start this shift? Can it be done that way?
Yes. Yeah. And to your point, one of the folks that we interviewed on our podcast, he's a brilliant educator. His name is Chris Lehman, and he started a few schools in the Philadelphia area. These are very innovative schools, and he writes in his book, title is, I believe, Building Schools 2.0. He writes in the book right at the very beginning, the reasons that we have the schools that we have is because bureaucrats, community members, many educators thinks that's what schools are. That's the school model that they went through. That's right. The school model that they're comfortable with. So, the other factor here, which we hardly ever talk about, but is a big pain point for me, are universities and colleges, because universities and colleges, to a large degree, are perpetuating part of the problem that we have. Instead of being leaders about how do we change education, we're continuing to produce the same type of teachers that we always have. But anyway, to your question, one of the fellows that we interviewed on our podcast, his name is Mike Oliver, and Mike is he's the principal of Zacarri Elementary School in Mesa, Arizona. Mm-hmm. He's been there. He's in his 19th year. Zacarri is one of 55 elementary schools in Mesa. Mesa is one of the largest communities, if not the largest community now in Arizona.
That's correct.
And Mike's elementary school is vastly different than other elementary schools in the district because he chose to make it so. And he worked with his teachers to make it so. And it evolves around two things: greater student agency. We're going to figure out what excites kids, and we're going to provide them with the opportunities to dig into that. The engine that drives us is going to be literature or reading. Mm-hmm. That's a fundamental skill that if you don't have that in the world, you don't go very far.
That's exactly right.
The other point is teacher agency, meaning teachers are going to be empowered to put forth the effort to actualize the why. So instead of everything coming from the top down from Mike has empowered his teachers, and his students are alive with discovering what it is that they want to learn about. And when you walk into Zacarri, it's vastly different than any other elementary school that you're ever going to walk into. So here's an example of somebody who said, we're going to do it differently. He's in a very, in one sense, it's a very traditional, huge district, but he was able to do it because he presented a model and he's gotten the results and the outcomes that they're looking for. So it can be done. It takes courage, but it also takes working with people, collaborating with people to decide what is it that we want to do. Mike didn't say this is what we're going to do. Mike said, what is it that we collectively want to do as a school on behalf of our kids?
Now, is that collective being teachers and parents and the community all together?
Absolutely. They have people moving into the community because they want to go to Zacarri Elementary School.
I understand. I own property not far from there. And my daughter lives on the Chandler Mesa border. And I have a 2-year-old grandson. And she's even said, we want him to go to school there.
Yeah.
That elementary school. That's incredible. That's incredible. It's interesting because even in the traditional model, you see young students for second, third grade, they're so excited and they want to learn, and then it dies. And that has to stop.
Yeah, and it dies. You're familiar with the survey that Gallup does every year on U.S. businesses.
Absolutely, I do.
It's the engagement survey. It says, what is it, 70+ % of U.S. workers are on the spectrum of disengagement from work. They also do one with kids and superintendents, and they have found a very similar number. And interestingly, engagement goes like this from elementary to high school.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big reason is the more you advance in the grades, getting into 6th grade, middle school, high school, it's all about content acquisition. It's all about ingesting content and proving what you know. And what they haven't captured in that type of environment, and this is really the traditional environment that we've been working in for over 100 years, what they haven't captured there is what's motivating the kids.
Yes.
Okay. You're telling me what you want me to learn, and then I have to tell you back what I've learned. That's not a motivating system. So that's why we see engagement plummet in many high schools. Not all, but in many high schools.
I see young people, teens at that age group, where the disenchantment starts. And I see them setting up their own businesses. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, right? They understand technology. They've grown up with it every single day in their life. It doesn't scare them like it scares me. And they know what it can do. I had one young woman, not in the junior high yet. She said, and I was amazed, I'm going to read it to you. She said, I'd like to have classes that address innovation. I didn't even know what innovation meant when I was in 6th grade. Innovation and design methods or strategies, things that I'm going to use throughout my life. She said, I don't care about things I'm never going to use again, like the Pythagorean theorem. She must have been taking math. Now, how do educators catch up? It looks like these students are ahead of the game.
Yeah, so it's a realization, it's an acceptance that we're not reaching kids where we are. And you used a word, Frank, early on. You said interest, the student's interest. Mm-hmm. We have to work to capture, to understand, and give them opportunities to develop their interests. We have to give up a certain amount of control that all of this content we're trying to feed them is absolutely imperative. We feel that if we don't teach this and we don't teach that, they're going to be incomplete citizens. But what we're not doing necessarily are getting to those skills that you talked about early on, especially something like collaboration.
Yep.
All right. We just interviewed a brilliant person on the podcast. His name is Ed Hess. Ed Hess. He's a professor of business at the Darden School, the business school at the University of Virginia. And Ed has written a book called Hyper Learning, How to Adapt at the Speed of Change. And what Ed talks about is we have to stop training kids to do what machines are already doing.
Exactly.
We have to help kids develop the skills that machines can't yet do, or we're basically going to be obsolete. Yes. So he talks, and you use this word early on, he talks a lot about collaboration, working in teams. How do you do that? Now, we put kids in groups in high school. They're supposed to work collectively on projects. What we don't do is teach them how to work in a team. That's right. We think that by putting them in a group, okay, they're around a table, now they're going to be collaborative. Well, they're not. My co-host, Kirsten, is a adjunct faculty member. She teaches business development, and she has them working on projects. And, the kids will be in groups of 5 or 6. And what she finds is that 2 or 3 of them do the bulk of the work. The other 2, they slack off because they think, oh, I'm going to get an A because these 3 are working really hard. But
we have a smart group.
Yeah, we haven't taught them how to really collaborate. So again, it all goes back to this idea of what is it that we're about? What is it that we want these kids? I always use the expression, when they walk across the stage to get their diploma, what is it that we want them to know and be able to do?
Exactly. That's perfectly said. Jeff, I was in high tech. I traveled a great deal, and I used to go to Switzerland a fair amount, and in my high tech life. And this one of the Swiss business leaders was telling me in a meeting. He said, "This is back in the early 1980s,"
Right.
and he said, "We view education as an investment, unlike the daycare model in the United States." Now, he wasn't being nasty; he was making a statement, right? And then I said, "Well, what do you do?" He says, "Well, we try to push the envelope by using futurists to help us understand where's the world going to be in 10 or 20 years, and what skills do we need to be teaching now so it becomes second nature to them." Okay, of a movement of that magnitude, is that possible, or are we going to have to do it one school at a time, that type of model?
So I'll give you an example. The other thing that the Swiss do that's really interesting is that as kids progress into high school, they get the kids into internships.
Yes, that's
They
correct.
get them out of the buildings, and they get them working in various businesses, again, to explore what is it that you're interested in. We will help set you up with somebody who can help develop these skills. Now, one of the folks that we interviewed is a good friend of our show. His name is Ken Wallace, Dr. Ken Wallace. And Ken is the superintendent of the Maine Township High School District in Park Ridge, Illinois. And Ken works in a very diverse district. He has very, very wealthy communities. He has average income communities, and then he has a lot of free and reduced lunch communities, if you will. And what Ken said is, we can prepare our kids to go to college. And what happens so many times is that they go to college thinking, one, I either have no idea what I want to major in, so I bounce around for 2 years and I cost my parents, 40 grand a year, or I think I'm interested in X, and long way through my sophomore or junior year, I'm going to switch majors. And again, I'm going to be here for now 5 or 6 years. What Ken says is there are many, many, many very high paying jobs that don't require you to go to college, that don't require you to go to a 4-year college. So what Ken has done is he's now around 650 partners in the business community where he can get his kids in touch with people who can help develop their skills and interests in these particular areas. So yes, this can be done. It takes people who are looking down the road and saying, why am I pushing to get these kids into 4-year colleges if they're going to come out with enormous debt in 6 or 8 years, when they could come out making much more than a college graduate does?
That's absolutely right. I've seen so many cases. I have 2 daughters who both went to school, and I remember them saying to me, "Dad, I'm 18 years old. I can't decide where I want to have lunch, let alone what am I going to be for the rest of my life? I don't know."
You need opportunities to experiment and to look at different things.
Exactly. And the mindset has been so much college prep, college prep, college prep, that a lot of the skills that were taught, like when I was in school, like shop and things along those lines, are gone. So you don't get to dabble. And that internship program is brilliant. I love that idea.
Yeah, and we're downplaying the arts in many schools because of tight budgets. And one of the leaders of the international education transformation movement, the late Ken Robinson, spoke brilliantly about the devastation of losing the arts for kids, because many kids have that interest, and that's really what they want to go into, drama or music or writing. And yet those are often the first things that go.
Exactly. And then there's a connection. And this is what I hear master's students at Arizona State talking about, is they'll say, well, what's the connection between the arts and the science and the culture and the business? They all tie together. Why are we not pushing that component? this is important because it brings this into the organ. And here's how it all comes. And this is how you have your culture. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. So one of the there's a movement now, and it's being led by a very, very smart educator, Tom Vander Ark, and it's called place-based learning.
Wow.
And what Tom says is get the kids out into their neighborhoods, get the kids out of the building, and have them do observations. So he cites the examples, and you were talking about music and the arts. He'll have kids go out and do observations of what are the sounds that we're hearing in this neighborhood? What's creating the sounds in the neighborhood? Then he'll have a different group of kids go out in the same neighborhood to look for something else and say, how are these things related, right?
Yep.
And it develops kids' powers of observation and analysis, which are two very highly valuable skills.
That's right. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in, you have to have those.
So the walls of the school are permeable, right?
Exactly.
The community becomes the school.
Exactly. I love that. Now, I watched the podcast that you did, and you interviewed, and I hope I get their names right, Todd Nesloni. Did I get close? And Adam DeVico.
Yes.
I got them right. Good. Wow. How about that?
Yeah.
And they talk with you about releasing the leader in every kid. A great name, right? And they said the confidence is the first step, but it's only the first step.
Right.
What do we need to do now? They got their confidence.
So Todd has this great expression that you have to find out what breaks their heart.
Yes, I remember.
And what he means by that is something that they're so passionate about that it pulls them in. Talks about in the book, he talks about kids who have started pet services, for example, or kids who have noticed that there are families that don't have enough to eat, right? And it breaks their heart. They're observing this, right? Mm-hmm. And what he says is we have to give them the confidence to go out and explore, but we also have to give them the opportunities and the resources to do something about it. So once you understand their interests, how do you help the child develop that? What kind of opportunities are there that will help them develop? And also, how do you help showcase that as a valuable contribution to society? Mm-hmm. So we want to be able to relate the stories of these kids leading in certain areas. It's not the leading that you and I are thinking about where, I'm head of the student council or the Model UN. No, these are kids who are going out and leading an initiative, an effort to do something that's important for their community.
That's wonderful. It's going from idea, I have this idea, I have to get them confidence, and then we have to move to action.
Exactly.
And I think that's where the magic is.
Exactly.
Is getting the action. Now, Jeff, COVID changed everything on how education is delivered and the way it's being thought about at this point. It's forced change to occur. So in your role, do you see benefits from this change having to occur? Do you see this more collaboration coming? Is there some good going to come out of this?
Yeah. So a couple things. I want to say something that I think the educators who are fighting this fight right now are, in my mind, they're like first responders.
Absolutely.
And they deserve as much credit as the people who are fighting the fight in hospitals, medical institutions, because they're basically thrown into changing on a dime in order to try to keep education going. Now, when this first started, we interviewed almost 20 educators in very brief 15 to 20 minute interviews on the podcast. And what we were trying to find out was, how are you responding? And what are the big issues about responding? And what they said almost to a person is that the big loss here, it's not necessarily the content, it's the social and emotional connection.
Exactly.
All right. And it's not just the social and emotional connection between me and my kids, but me and my colleagues. So that has been, I would say that whole discussion around social and emotional intelligence has been really accelerated since COVID hit. The other thing that they talked about was that COVID gives us an opportunity to do things differently on the other side of it.
Exactly.
They didn't necessarily know what it was, but they weren't rushing to say, can't wait to get back to what we were doing before. No, this gives us an opportunity to change what we're doing. And we're already starting to see various institutions, schools do some things that are different. And I think the distance learning is going to stay in some fashion, because I think what educators are going to find out is that in one sense, it's just a lot less money to try to teach this way.
Yes.
Doesn't mean they haven't worked out the effectiveness always on it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a learning opportunity. It's being thrown into the deep end of the pool to change how you're doing things. And right now it's a bumpy road. You have people that are, I have my wife's niece is a second grade elementary teacher. And she said, I love this. I'm as close to my kids now as I've ever been. And you have other teachers saying, I can't get them to turn on their camera. They won't work with me. So I think, the beauty here is that they're exploring different models, the hybrid model where you're working with a full class, or you're working with a few kids at a time, or you're setting up hopefully dedicated group work. We're still too early in it, I think, to say this is what's gonna come out of it.
Exactly. I see the same thing in the business sector. Also, Jeff, we're seeing much more looking for mindfulness trainers, recognition experts who I've interviewed on the show, emotion,
Right.
because they said, hey, leave your emotion at the door. Well, that's not going to happen, right? The emotion comes in the door with you. You can leave your backpack at the door, but the emotion goes in with you. So those are the types of things that even in the business world, they're saying, we got to be different now. This thing is so devastating, but it's an opportunity to press the reset button, for lack of a better term.
Right. And I think we both used this word early on, relationships.
Yes.
What's happened is that the relationships that we had are frayed, and we have to recognize that and address that going forward. It can't just be we're all about the work. We talk extensively in our book about this. The reason a lot of change efforts fail is that most people focus on the mechanics of change as opposed to the people who are leading and implementing the change.
Correct.
And leaders who are successful in bringing about change focus on the people and themselves. How's my emotional intelligence? They're focusing on themselves in order to lead that change effectively.
That's exactly the case. I came from big corporate world for several years, and there was all these initiatives, and I remember sitting as I was coming up saying, did you talk to anybody who actually has to do this?
Exactly.
Okay, we're missing the boat, and I'm glad. This is a horrible thing, this COVID, but it's forcing us to think different. Finally, the old Steve Jobs term.
Right.
Now, years ago, Jeff, I was involved with Delane Easton. She was the California Secretary of Education. It was a long time ago. And she said to me one time, she said, the traditional education model pays the bills. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you got to have some basic skills. You have to be able to read. You have to be able to write. You have to be able to do some math, right? She said, however, I proposed, and she wanted to get, and she called them tiger teams. And she thought at the state and national level, and this is to develop these innovative models. Okay, maybe it's an internship program. Maybe it's something where, let's see, if we've got a number of kids who are interested in X, well, let's bring in experts in X, and let's see where they can go with this, and make that part of the curriculum, as opposed to this, we have to teach to the test model. Does that make sense?
Well, I love the ending. as opposed to teaching to the test model,
Mhm.
because I think that's hugely detrimental. I don't know any teacher who likes teaching to these high stakes tests, because they're in many cases they're basically trying to prepare kids to do well on a test, which shows what knowledge they have. It doesn't necessarily show what they can do with the knowledge.
Correct.
Okay, but I'm not. I'll go back to her expression, paying the bills. I think sometimes the traditional model is really in some cases mortgaging the future as opposed to paying the bills.
That's good.
Right, and because we're putting kids. We're putting kids in peril. We're putting them at debt because we're not giving them the skills that they're going to need to really excel at life. We're still in the old content acquisition model. And this is hard for me to say. I developed textbooks for almost 40 years. I helped produce these big tomes that, we sold into states as the curriculum. Many people used them at the curriculum, but they're not serving the needs of kids. The other thing, Frank, is I'm not a big fan of any top-down initiative. I think we should give local school districts the charge. You need to do what's right for your community. You're empowered through the tax base of this community, and you're held accountable to deliver on whatever mission is agreed to in this community. But these big initiatives that we've seen, in the last 20 years or so, haven't really borne a lot of fruit. And there's a huge skepticism on the part of educators that here's another one. We'll just have to wait we'll wait this one out because somebody else is going to come along with another big program that's going to change it. I think it really has to be localized. Superintendents, other administrators in the district working with their people to do what's right for the kids and the community.
It's incredible. It's something that is so important, and education is so critical to success. But then it's defining of the education. When I was coming up, you got to have a degree, then you got to get a master's degree. Okay. Now that's not the case. It's, can you think things through?
Exactly.
Can you work with other people?
Right.
All right. Do you have an initiative? Can you see somewhere out there? The young woman that worked for me that I mentioned as the head of the Colorado Technology, one of the things that she preaches to students is look and see, like you said, what can a machine do? Don't do that. Do something different. Do something other than what a machine can take over.
Right.
Right. That's incredible. Jeff, this has been an incredible conversation, just absolutely amazing. Is there any last thoughts, words you want to leave with all the viewers around the world here today?
Yeah. So one of the brilliant minds we had on the podcast, a gentleman by the name of Grant Lichtman. And Grant's, he's actually had a similar journey to yours. He was in the corporate world, and then he was in education, and now he's focused on trying to bring these two worlds together. And what Grant said is the interesting thing about educators is they often feel and are alone. That as a principal, I often have no idea what educational leaders are doing just down the street for me. And I have seen this. I've seen this firsthand when I work with school districts, that these people will occasionally get together. Principals in a school district will occasionally get together, but they're basically operating on their own on a day-to-day basis. And what Grant said is, guaranteed there is somebody wrestling with the same problem that you are. They have the same constraints that you do. And the resources that are available now on the web, the writing that's going on the web, the educational magazines that are available on the web, like there's one called the 74, it stands for the 74 million kids in schools. These have tremendous articles. Tom Vander Ark's got a wonderful site. There are people out there doing this work. Find them. You don't have to do this alone.
Mm-hmm. even bringing within your own community.
Absolutely.
We have in the business sector, we would have like think tanks or masters groups or whatever term you want to call it. But you could come in and you have to break the silo. The
Right.
silo model has failed for generations. And we got to make, and that's where the collaboration is going to come in. We have to get it at that level.
Right.
Across the board. Well, this has been just amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just about out of time. I want to thank my guest, Jeff Ikler, for sharing this amazing vision that he has about where we're going to go with schools and how do we create this culture of change. So, Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity, Frank. I've enjoyed just having a conversation with you.
This has been just wild. We're going to have you back maybe with one of your partners in the future. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're just about out of time. As I mentioned, I want you to do 3 things. And life's going to throw at you, no matter what life throws at you, and it's going to throw a lot of stuff at you. Please do 3 things. Look up, get up, and never, ever give up. Start moving forward. Pick up the pieces, and better times and better people like Jeff will come into your life. If you'd like more information about Jeff and his programs, you can contact him on his website or contact me, and I will make sure that it gets to him. You can see this show on ROKU TV. You can see it on my YouTube page, Frank Zacarri. And I will send links to Jeff, and he'll post them at all the locations that he puts out information. If you use the YouTube, please subscribe to the page, and you can see all of the life-altering events interviews. They're all just like this. Let me leave you with this, as I do every week, ladies and gentlemen. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Jeff has shown us where many of those rocks are. Join us again next week, and we investigate another life-altering event. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
My pleasure.